saw them while they were putting it up here, and it was pretty delicate. So first, once again, I want to thank the group we had this morning. There was a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time and a lot of good ideas. So I appreciate everybody's staying on topic and staying focused as we work through things. There's a lot more details back in the room on the charts that I've tried to summarize here the best I could, and I'm sure I've left a couple things out. But what I've looked at and focused on is the action items from the second part of the discussion, and try to categorize those into the 5 categories that we discussed also, starting with the policy. And it was one of the last things that was said, but I put it here first, was reinstitute Project Impact. Is folks familiar with what Project Impact was? Quite a few hands in here. So I won't go into the details of what it was. If you're not sure, Google it. It's like everything. If you're not sure what something is, always Google it. All the answers are there between Google and Wikipedia. The next thing we talked about from a policy standpoint was to increase, or I should say improve, incentives and decrease the disincentives to mitigation from within the tax code and tax policy that is a disincentive for mitigation by allowing people to write off maybe some of their bad decisions they've made. One of the things that was talked about was, I guess, some of the things that are taking place right now in Sandy, with lack of a better term, is quick recovery, where communities for large projects, if they go ahead and sign off on the project worksheet, they get the money quicker. But if you want to take longer to put in mitigation, it's going to just take longer before you get the money back. So there's an incentive. If you want the money, sign off on this now, and not taking the time to think about mitigation and building back better. Prioritize the policies. This came from a discussion of, a lot of times we focus on the money and the amount of budget that's available for it from a resource standpoint. And the comment was made is there's a belief that the money's there. So it's not an issue of funding. It's an issue of making decisions how we want to prioritize that funding. So making those better policy decisions about what our priorities are within our communities, but also at the state and federal level. Talked a little bit about every coastal state should have an enhanced mitigation plan, which makes them more eligible. It makes them eligible for more dollars in a post-disaster situation. Clearly align the policies across government. This came up several times, that one federal agency has one set of policies and needs, another federal agency has another set of policy needs, the next one has another set of policies and needs, many times contradicting each other. It would be better if we clear those and not be contradictory, but also align them, so that if you're writing a grant for one application or one grant program from one federal agency, you're not having to recreate that or come up with different information for the next grant that you're doing. Also aligns those policies so that we are trying to move forward to a common goal, and many times not trying to work at cross purposes. Also from the policy, and I think this was talked a little bit about yesterday too, is the need to update the P&G from the Corps. As part of that update, focusing on coastal mitigation policies, not always just focusing on hardening of facilities, but also looking at some non-structural measures and things like that, some of the green areas and natural beneficial functions of our coastal floodplains. And also from a policy standpoint is to actually expand and implement the requirements that are currently there from COBRA for the coastal barrier resource areas, to take a look at that. And I didn't write it on here, but another policy thing that was discussed, which we didn't talk a lot about because it was mentioned, but I talked a little bit afterwards, is eliminate the mandatory purchase requirements for flood insurance, which is, I know a lot of folks think, are saying go the opposite way and have flood insurance required for everyone. This was something to talk about. We should examine the concept of maybe we should eliminate the mandatory purchase requirement. So as a point of dialogue and discussion, as we're putting together a report to think about what those alternatives are and what that would mean. From a data perspective, thought was there's a lot of data that we have, a lot of data that's available right now, but how do we gather that data and then improve the analytics on the data to improve our decision making? How do we pull that information together? Data integration, where we have collecting data for different uses, different programs. How do we aggregate that data and then also integrate it so that we can use it for multiple purposes? And removing some of the redundancies where we collect information multiple times for different purposes. Knowing where it is a big part of that. Also from a data, and from earlier in our discussion, we talked about people's short-term memories. A lot of times we hear about flood amnesia. Shortly after a flood or an event, people forget what the impacts were. Right after the event, everybody's eager and urgent to do maybe the Build Back Better, what we would call do the right thing. But as we get further and further away from the event, people forget what it was. So we need to do a better job of documenting the event, getting the data, whether it's high water mark, what the recurrences were, things like that we need to document that and put it out there so it stays fresh in folks' minds and they don't quickly forget. From a technology standpoint, we talked a little bit about making the data more available via portable and handheld devices. A lot of people are walking around with one of these things, or it's a Google device, or it's a new Windows device, or it's an iPhone, or it's an Android phone. We're all walking around with these small little computers now. It's a good way to make data available, make it useful for folks by either having the data and applications built for it so people can access it quickly and readily, is one of the thoughts from a technology standpoint to help. But helps both from an education standpoint so people understand it, but also from a local communities being able to implement the information and the mitigation planning exercises. Along that line becomes having better repositories for the data, and then also access to that data. So where is it located and how can you easily get it? So these two really go hand in hand with each other. From a research standpoint, a couple of the highlights there were case studies. Doing some research into case studies of, comparing natural defenses versus man-made defenses. What's the benefits of those? What's the results of that? To better understand that and have that information that's available as we're starting to prepare mitigation plans. Also, more case studies around the natural beneficial functions of our coastal floodplains. A lot of information out there already, but one of the thought was maybe we need some more. Getting back to the idea of multiple federal programs having conflicting requirements is creating a compendium of what are the conflicting federal requirements. But the counter, the other side of that is what are the federal requirements from various programs so that we can start down the process of aligning those. We need to do some research in that. There's a feeling that everybody has and says about it, but how bad is it? Where are they? What does it look like? We need to do the research to put those pieces together. From a social and economic standpoint, we talked about a community campaign and planning to focus on things, to come up with those talking points. It was actually one of the last things we had is if we come up with this action plan and this plan for how we improve mitigation, we need to look at it as almost a campaign. And how do we implement it? Who's implementing? How do we educate people? whether our policymakers at the state, local, federal level, we need to treat that as a campaign to sell it, is a big point. And we should talk to people outside our box. We need to talk to people who, we're very, very good at talking to each other, and we do that quite a bit. But we need to be talking to folks who are outside of our box, out of our sphere, because a lot of times they're the ones making the decisions, whether it's at a personal level or a community level. We need to be talking to others that we typically don't talk to. And a big thing that I think everybody agree with is we need to get into our schools. I think Allison Harden, you made the comment that her kids come home from school, stop, drop, and roll. Well, they all know what that means. I think everybody would talk about recycling programs. Their kids come home from school and ask, why aren't we recycling? Well, all of a sudden you start recycling. From a floodplain management and a coastal flooding mitigation standpoint, getting that into our schools with kids at a young age so they start thinking about that. I've often thought about from a fire prevention week. I think everybody in this country, it's, when they were in third grade or fourth grade or whatever it was a long time ago for me, you walked down the street to the firehouse, you had to tour the firehouse, and you got to understand fire prevention. Maybe we should do something similar for flooding. Establishing a community vision. What's the community want to be? What's it want to be when it grows up? What ties that community together? What are the important parts of it from a social standpoint to focus on? That's a really quick summary of a lot of really good discussion this morning, and I know I probably left out some of the great points in there, but we need to make sure we get those into the report and the dialogue as the forum findings are being put together. But I thought it was a really good dialogue and discussion this morning. Again, I want to thank the group for all the great work they did both yesterday and today. So I think that's it, unless you want questions or input or move on to Chad. Okay. And since Chad won't do it, I'll thank his group already. I'm sure they did a great job.